And one of the things I'm trying to do with This Is Your Mind on Plants is start that post-drug war conversation about drugs, which is one of the reasons I included caffeine, a totally legal drug that everybody uses. What does that have to teach us? And in a way, one of the most powerful drug experiences I've had in my life was the first cup of coffee after 3 months off.
Really?
It was psychedelic. It
Really?
was incredible. Yeah.
Come on.
Try it. Try getting off caffeine for a while.
3 months?
3 months without caffeine.
How am I going to do a podcast?
You may have to take a hiatus.
I'm going to run out of things to talk about. I'll fall asleep.
It was really hard. I did it actually at the suggestion of Roland Griffith, who, the psychedelic researcher, who before that was the world's leading expert on caffeine. And I was interviewing him about caffeine for this chapter. And he said, well, you're never going to understand your relationship to caffeine until you get off it. So it was kind of a dare. And it was really hard. It was one of the hardest things I've done.
Really?
Oh, I was a mess.
For how long?
3 months.
You're a mess until you...
I was functional after a month. The first week I was not functional at all. I felt like I had contracted ADD. I could not stay on track. Everything, the periphery just kept intruding on my thinking. I couldn't write. I mean, writing is the most linear thing you can do, right?
Right.
And it's all about concentration, obviously. And I couldn't concentrate. And I felt like there was this veil between me and reality that, I was not quite seeing, getting, feeling. And it was weird. I didn't feel myself for the whole time. And I thought, what does that mean? It means yourself is caffeinated. and that is baseline consciousness for me and for many people. And that's not a bad thing, but I think we have a debt to these plants that we owe them. And so I spent a lot of time in that researching that chapter, looking back in history for when caffeine enters the West. And it doesn't happen until the 1650s in Europe. So we actually have a before and after, which we don't with a lot of drugs because they just go back, millennia. And before caffeine, it was a very different world and a very different consciousness. People were drunk a lot of the time, buzzed almost all of the time. People drank morning, noon, and night because it was safer than water, right? Water was really how you got diseases. If you fermented things, even low alcohol, it killed a lot of the microbes. So people, even kids, you gave your kids hard cider for breakfast.
Wow.
And this was true in America up until the 1800s, up until Prohibition. But anyway, caffeine comes along in the 1650s, and tea and chocolate and coffee all arrive in the same decade in England, which is kind of like great decade, right? And things start to change.
In the form of coffee?
Coffee and tea. And chocolate, which also has caffeine in it.
And so what would they had never experienced coffee before the 1600s?
That's right. They had in the Arab world. They'd had it from like 1200 or something like that. Supposedly it was discovered in 800s by a herder in like Ethiopia who noticed that his goats were getting very frisky when they ate this particular berry and would stay up all night. And so he kind of like started experimenting, or he brought it to these monks and they made a drink, and it's like, ooh.
It makes sense that it was in the Arab world, because if you think about all the science that was being done in the Arab world, all the literature back then.
So one theory is that the Arab world had coffee first and had this incredible golden age.
Yes.
And there is a historian of psychoactives named Wolfgang Schivelbusch, and he correlates.
What a name.
Isn't that wonderful? German, of course. Wolfgang Schivelbusch. It's a great book. It's called Tastes of Paradise. Highly recommend it. And he said this was the perfect drug for the culture that invented mathematics and had this incredible, and it helped the culture in two ways. One was, as safe as alcohol made water, boiling it made it much safer. And coffee and tea, of course, both require boiling water. No one drank boiling water or hot beverages before. So this gave this incredible public health boost to these places. And then you have the drug that basically fosters a kind of more linear, rational, focused way of thinking. And so there's a lot of evidence linking coffee and tea consumption with the Enlightenment in France and with the Age of Reason in England And people in the 1600s started writing about it. So like, wow, people, we have this new civil and sober drink and it was so popular because it was new that people drank less and they used more caffeine. And that, I think, makes possible things like the Industrial Revolution, because when you're doing physical labor outdoors, which was most of history, right? You could be buzzed. You didn't have to know what time it was. You worked from sun up to sundown. There were beer breaks actually on farms in England. They would give you beer because it gave you calories and made you happy. But when you start moving into like running machines and doing double entry bookkeeping, you need a clearer head. And when you start moving toward night shifts and overnight shifts, you couldn't do that without caffeine. And that's when it begins. There's a whole new, it freed us from the rhythms of the sun, which dictated everything in Western culture. You could only work till the sun went down. So it had a profound effect on capitalism, the rise of capitalism. And the clearest illustration of that I came across is the coffee break. Where did that come from? The coffee break actually has a history. We know the company that came up with it. And it was a necktie manufacturer in Denver called Wigwam Weavers.
Really?
And Wigwam Weavers made these very intricate silk neckties. And during World War II, they lost all their best loom operators to the war effort. So they hired these old guys to do it, who weren't getting drafted, and they couldn't do it very well. Then they hired these women to do it, and they could do it beautifully. And there were very intricate patterns, very complicated looms. I mean, you've seen how they, the patterns on neckties. And the women could do it really well, but only for about 4 or 5 hours. So they called a meeting. And the owner said to the workers, what could we do? We have to improve your efficiency and, we need more output. And the women said, well, give us a coffee break. They didn't call it that initially. And give us some time at like 10 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon and give us some coffee and tea. So we started doing it. And overnight, their productivity and efficiency goes up. Quality control goes up. And so he institutes the coffee break. And think about it. Your employer gives you a drug and then gives you time off in which to ingest it during the workday.
Yeah.
Why would they do that? Because it contributes mightily. So the coffee break might seem like it's something your boss is giving you, but it's a way to extract more value from you.